Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody can hear me this wonderful Monday morning. Thank you and thanks for coming and welcoming us on ICTM's PowerTalk series. Not to scare anyone, but it is the first working day of the last month of 2024. And I think that is why it is a great time to sort of like look back, have some introspective, and of course, talk about today's topic, which is strategic data and frameworks in board governance. Before we actually go on, just a few housekeeping notes. Once more, welcome everybody for joining us and giving us your time this morning. As you notice, you'll be muted when you actually join, but the chat box is there for questions, any technical difficulties you may have. Of course, there's Q&A at the end of the session. Those will be in the Q&A box. If you put them in the chat box, we'll find them there as well, but we will try and fit in as many as possible. The entire session is recorded. The access will be given sort of after. And of course, if at any time you need to leave the webinar, you can rejoin if it is still ongoing. So just a quick one. I know it's a word that we all have used a lot, especially in corporates over the past couple of years, but sustainability really has become an essential part of corporate strategy. I think a lot of boards are now looking at it, no longer as just this buzzword, but it is part of the DNA of a company in general. Public expectations actually have made that the case, and regulatory standards have sort of emphasized that as well, but those both are steadily evolving. As such, this session actually aims to provide a high-level overview of what board members actually should be focusing on, because there are so many that we think about. The problem is when you have quite so many information is sort of pulling it all in and discarding the white noise, right? Especially when it comes to sustainability and ESG reporting. And this is influenced, of course, recent frameworks such as the National Sustainability Reporting Framework, and of course, the World Bank's ESG reporting standards for public listed companies in Malaysia as well. And of course, for the person to actually bring us through that, this knowledge sharing segment for us, it's going to be Susanna Hassanol. She will highlight key sustainability developments, the role of technology, the importance of aligning with importance of aligning with NSRF and latest international ESG reporting standards as well. So just to give her a brief overview, I've actually seen part of her presentation, and I find it actually fascinating. She is SAP's head of sustainability in Asia Pacific and Japan. Over 20 years of experience, leadership experience in sustainability and technology across ASEAN and global markets. And presently, she's actually focusing on leveraging technology and data, the other tools that I think will be crucial in this going forward to drive sustainability outcomes for SAP's customers across 25 industries, in particular, emphasis on decarbonization and circularity. And with that, I will pass it over to Susanna to take you through her presentation. There's videos as well in the middle, and we will come back for the Q&A session afterward. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Nadia, for this very warm welcome, and good morning to you all in Kuala Lumpur or wherever you may be. I'm not too far down, down in the south in Singapore, where I've been living the past 15 years and once before, so very familiar with the region here. So thanks again for joining us this morning, and I'm very excited to speak with you all. We'll just get my slides started, and then we'll get going. So I hope my slides are showing now already. So Nadia already gave a wonderful introduction to this topic. So sustainability strategy and the role of technology. So I'm hoping to give you some very tangible takeaways, which you can take into your daily work as members of the boards of these leading Malaysian companies. But what's really the reason why we're all doing this, looking into sustainability data, ESG reports? Well, sustainability is a topic of strategic importance, and that's why increased transparency requirements are now in place. So I'll be looking at these from a Malaysian and international perspective and giving you insights how technology can help with those. And then we round up with my recommendations. Now, what's really the global context that we're in? Now, 92% of materials are wasted because many products are actually designed for singular use, and we don't actually do a very good job in keeping those materials in circulation. And this take, make, waste is still very much the narrative in many industries. And that's why we also have this huge plastics pollution problem, especially in this part of the world. And I think we could do so much better in dealing with the materials, keeping those in circulation. So that's one of the biggest opportunities. Climate, since COP29, again, very topical topic. Despite all net zero aspirations, we still keep editing globally over 50 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. And we know what are the implications of this in Malaysia and elsewhere. Floods and so many things are actually destabilizing our business. But of course, there's the human factor as well. Lots of room for improvement. Over 3 million people actually die annually in work-related incidents and for other work-related causes. So this is clearly also something that is not acceptable, not to mention human rights violations in this part of the world, especially. So I think this really gives us the context to try to do so much better, because businesses bear a disproportionate responsibility for fixing these things. Now, there's also a huge dependency on nature in the economies here in Asia and Malaysia as well. So if we look at the world's GDP, in average, 52% of that depend on nature in a direct or intermittent way. But here in this part of the world, this dependency is even higher. So if we look at the Malaysian stock-listed companies, 54% of the revenues depend on nature in a direct or intermittent way. And why is that? Well, there's a lot of activities happening outdoor, agriculture, construction, and so on. And we depend on materials for so many of those natural materials for so many of those economic outputs. And if we start messing with nature, well, a lot of this is at risk. At the same time, increasingly, board directors and CEOs and the C-suites understand that there is actually a real value creation when we deal with sustainability and invest into it in an effective way. So based on the survey that we ran last year, we see that 50% of the leaders in Asia Pacific and Japan now expect also to get a financial return in a positive way on their sustainability investments in the next couple of years. So I think this connection between value creation, avoiding risk, and creating future businesses is becoming clearer and clearer for most leaders. The question is your company having the same view, or are you lagging behind? I leave that for you to ponder upon. Let's talk about the risks just very briefly, a little bit more, because this is a material topic for most of your companies. So I already alluded that with rising temperatures and sea levels, agricultural output is at risk. Productivity for those people working outdoors in particular is rapidly decreasing. This leads to losses in tourism and trading, and not least mentioning the loss of land and assets. So if we actually look at what the map will look like in this part of the world, with rising sea levels, if we continue on this trend that we are right now, all the spaces that you see here in red are actually going to be below the tide line, still within this century. So I think if this doesn't propel us to change certain things, I don't know what. But now let's look a little bit closer into the key strategic frameworks when it comes to sustainability disclosures and reporting, and how the Malaysia national framework sits into those. And I'll take a little bit of a different perspective here on a couple of key aspects, and also how that works in Malaysia in relation to some of those other key international things that you also need to be aware of. So this is quite a busy picture, but you often hear talk about the alphabet soup for international sustainability standards and disclosures. But I want to kind of demystify that a little bit, because it actually doesn't have to be that complex from a conceptual perspective. First of all, we need to acknowledge that there is the three partitions into three areas: environmental, social, and governance related issues. Some of those international standards cover all, some are only focused on certain ones. Now, if we look at the broadest international framework, it's fair to say that the European Union Sustainability Reporting Standards and the framework is the broadest one because it covers all three areas: environmental, social, and governance related matters when it comes to sustainability. GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, is probably something that your companies have already been using now, and it's also a very broad standard. But if we zoom into the environmental topic, there are also a couple of other standards that you need to be aware of. So, International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, collaborated recently with the International Financial Reporting Standards Organization, IFRS, and they issued jointly the S1 and S2 standards for sustainability and for climate that are also the foundation for the Malaysian national framework. One thing where all these three standards pretty much agree are the climate disclosures for scope 1, 2, and 3. So there's a high degree of, let's say, overlap and interoperability in terms of climate in particular. But what then differentiates these other standards one from another? That is the topic of sustainability and the materiality. And I want to give you just a little bit of highlight of how this plays in. So you are used to doing financial disclosures as part of your board work in a way. As in the case of financial materiality, also in case of sustainability, companies need to look at what's happening in the world around them, in the economy, in the real world, and how is this affecting the company. So for instance, how are floods in part of Malaysia or Asia or other parts of the world impacting your company's performance and sustainability metrics? This is considered the outside-in view or the financial materiality. But that's not all. When it comes to sustainability, many companies and a number of the frameworks also take the inside-out view, which is how is your company, how are your operations impacting the environment, the planet, the people? So this is called the impact materiality, very prominent in the GRI standard especially. But now, here's the crux of the issue. These two things actually come together in sustainability reporting under the term double materiality. So companies need to look under many standards into both of these directions. How is the world, the natural world, affecting you, as well as how are you affecting the world around you? So now when we come back to the major international standards, I just want to give you an overview of what's their primary orientation. Yeah. So as I already mentioned, the Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, takes a lot of inspiration from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and expects companies to disclose their impact on the outside world. On the other hand, the ISSB IFRS standard takes primarily orientation from kind of the outside in view. How is the external environment affecting your operations? Although it also incorporates some of the inside out perspective for scope 3 in particular. And the one standard that sits firmly in the middle of this is the European CSRD standards that kind of marries both worlds. So if you remember the earlier picture I showed, that's why the EU CSRD has the kind of the biggest bubble in terms of its scope. And now, as I mentioned, the Malaysian standards, it's mostly oriented towards the ISSB. So kind of the orientation here is outside in, although it also covers scope 3 emissions, which means how is your company impacting the outside world with your emissions? And why am I talking about these international standards, including the European one, if you're a company operating in Malaysia? Well, the EU CSRD also has extended extraterritorial applicability. I won't go into the details here, but if you haven't done the assessment whether your company might be need to apply to the European standards, I highly recommend doing that now. So there are certain threshold values in terms of turnover, number of people, as well as the type of company you may be operating under in the European Union. So it's really important to do this now in case you haven't done it now, and to get ready for it. And again, I remind you here, you need to disclose based on double materiality and not just the IFRS S1, S2, which is more focused towards single or the financial materiality. Now, a little excursion into what SAP is doing. So as a European company, we need to comply with the EU CSRD, and we have done our materiality assessment based on that framework. So we've identified these 9 material topics and have created this map of kind of prioritizing our focus and attention on these topics, which is a combination of impact materiality and finance materiality. And no surprise, the number 1 topic for us is climate. But it's not just about the assessment and reporting. I really want to highlight the importance of sustainability as part of company's strategy. Today, if you run a company and don't have a climate or sustainability strategy, frankly, I question, how do you think you are going to operate in the next years and decades with these numerous risks, but also opportunities arising in this context? So the materiality analysis is really the basis for your operations and business moving forward. Even if you aren't doing the double materiality assessment yet, because it may not be fully needed in Malaysia, I highly recommend doing it. And on the basis of this, you then need to set the strategic direction for your company. You need to set metrics and targets. So what I really want to say that the CSRD compliant report or the NSRF compliant report, that's not the end game here. You really have to adjust your business to the realities of the world. And as I highlighted, we depend on nature, we depend on ecosystems. Businesses need to operate in this environment, and it's getting increasingly challenging. So just a little bit more details concerning the process, the governance process that is needed to do the sustainability assessment. Now, I won't go into all details, but how we do it at SAP is that we start with a kind of a long list. It then gets refined by expert views and assessments, and we don't just use our own internal people for this. We actually have an external sustainability committee as well. And if they feel that they don't have the right competence to assess a certain topic, they also sometimes refer to other experts. So many checks and balances in this process is not trivial to run. But my point to you as board members really is that you have to make sure that you have the right governance, the right process in place, because how else would you arrive at the right scientifically validated conclusions? Now, we talked about the global standards, European ones, GRI, IFRS. And my point is, you probably need to be looking at many of those if you're operating globally. But here in Asia, situation is that IFRS S1 and S2 are the dominant standards. So 4 countries have already put those in place: Singapore, New Zealand, and Australia, in addition to Malaysia. And the rest is basically following suit in the next couple of years. The only country that doesn't specifically follow the IFRS S1, S2 standards is India. They have their own BRSR, disclosure standards base, very comprehensive, and even more onerous than the IFRS. So in my eyes, the IFRS S1, S2 disclosures are kind of the baseline, but chances, if you operate in the region or globally, that you need to disclose against many, many other standards as well. Many of our clients from SAP disclose against 3, 4, 5 standards. Fortunately, they have been largely aligned in the past years. Now, where is sustainability regulation and standards moving towards to? One key point is that if we look forward, it's not just a question of corporate level disclosures anymore. The focus is really dealing with products and materials in much more transparent ways. So if you look at these list of items here, I'm talking about palm oil, coffee, rubber, aluminium, steel, and so many other products. Well, if you're exporting these to the EU, you already need to disclose the carbon emissions. And of course, there are tax implications later. But my point really is that more and more jurisdictions are introducing these kind of schemes, and the list of these items and products and materials is increasing and increasing. I read somewhere that 75% of Malaysia's exports to the EU might fall under carbon border adjustment mechanisms, deforestation regulations, or others. And the next big thing coming up are plastics. So actually just last week, there were some massive negotiations happening in Korea, Busan, convened by the United Nations for the purpose of concluding a global plastics treaty. I think the negotiations still went on last night, so I haven't quite got the update yet, but please expect much more regulation, much more disclosures, and much more scrutiny on the topic of plastics. Now, it's no longer also okay just to share information on paper, maybe next to your import documents and so on. The European Union especially expect that this data, these sustainability disclosures, will be available in digital format and can be hence shared with various parties in the ecosystem. So if you're not yet available with the European Union's eco-design for sustainable products regulation, that's something to look up for in the future and understand how will you actually be expected to share that sustainability data in digital formats moving forward. And this is really important to maintain your market access, keep your compliance costs down, and to basically deal effectively with these regulations in the future. And one example of a company who's really actually done a lot of this work and is getting ready towards this multitude of global regulations is CP Foods from Thailand. So it's part of the CPF conglomerate, one of Thailand's biggest companies operating in many industries. So some time ago, they actually had a look at this global landscape, what they will need to do there, and said, okay, we're actually now going to invest into technology and get us ready to comply with all these regulations, as well as their voluntary science-based target initiative net zero goal. For those of you who are not yet so familiar with SBTI, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, it's in my view one of the leading organization globally that provides sectoral guidance for companies to create a science-based decarbonization or net zero plan. So CP Foods was actually the first time to get their targets validated by this organization in accordance with their latest guidance for the forestry, agriculture, and land use sector. And CP Foods also invested into SAP technology then to first of all get access to the relevant sustainability data in digital ways, and then to be able to track their performance in near real time to make sure that they are progressing towards these goals that they have set to themselves, and that they can comply with the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is effectively a carbon tax moving forward, as well as the upcoming United States SEC climate risk disclosures. Now, let's talk about assurance next, because this is also a very hot topic. Now, in Malaysia, the expectation is that you will be carrying out reasonable assurance for scope 1 and 2 emissions starting 2027. But there's also the note that these assurance requirements are subject to further consultation. If we take an international view, and look at these major standards, the EU standard, the US standard, especially, we need to note that limited assurance is usually required in the first step, followed by reasonable assurance for certain activities or over a period of time. So my point here really is that with this assurance, you need to start considering sustainability data with the same rigor and seriousness as you do with any other enterprise data, as you do with financial data. There's also been numerous studies that showed that companies who've tried to get assurance for their sustainability data have actually failed to do so. And this has been quite a big number globally. And it's really the auditors who are saying that, look, I cannot really audit an Excel sheet, right? Yeah, their expectations are much higher. So I would also really recommend that you apply the same rigor and expectations of sustainability data over time as you do with any other enterprise data. There are also penalties. Yeah, so failure to do so internationally will also cost you quite some money. But I was also asked to clarify a few key concepts that relate to this, because indeed there are many different topics and concepts floating around here, carbon offsets, carbon markets, and so on, and things like net zero, carbon neutral. What do these terms actually really mean? And I want to take a look at the term of net zero, first of all. We already talked about the Science Based Target Initiative as an organization that gives sectoral scientific guidance for decarbonization in particular. You should be aware that they have this guidance available for some, 12, 15 sectors now. And if your company is operating in these sectors and not yet knowledgeable or dealing with this methodology, I really think you should do so, because this is a very much a growing trend. So globally, 6,000 plus companies have now got their decarbonization targets validated by SBTi with reference to these decarbonization guidances for different sectors. And the point really here is that every sector will follow a different path towards net zero. And companies also have different kinds of business models and operational models, so there is no one size fits all. Secondly, I think if you don't have a big R&D department also, you can actually learn and get a lot of knowledge and guidance from these sectoral guidance documents from SBTi to chart the right path forward. Asian companies are really picking up on this guidance now, and especially last year, the number of companies that have started to doing this has grown a lot here in Asia Pacific. Overall, this approach grew over 100% year on year. But that's not all. I also often get asked about carbon markets, and I think there are a lot of misconceptions floating around the different terms there. We need to principally differentiate between two kinds of carbon markets. On one hand, we have the so-called cap and trade markets, also called compliance markets. So you find these, for instance, in China, the European Union, California, also a number of Asian markets. So a cap and trade market or a compliance market basically is a system where authorities in the country set binding limits for companies or for sectors to emit greenhouse gases. And usually these limits then decrease year over year, because the purpose of such a market mechanism is to limit the total emissions, but also typically to make the emitter pay. So next to reducing allowances for carbon, companies typically also need to purchase, let's say, licenses to emit. And these licenses can usually also be traded. So that's the emission trading scheme. These have proven to be a very effective method in terms of reducing in-country carbon emissions, because you have to pay. it costs money, and then basically you can only emit so and so much in a given time. Voluntary carbon markets, however, work very differently. This has usually been a private market sector initiative, and there are many developers who offer carbon credits of various kinds in different qualities, in different price segments. And it's been a bit of a wild, wild west, if you ask me, in the past years, lots of quality issues and, very, very, I would say, tumultuous years for this market. The key point here to understand that there has been, I would say, very little international regulation concerning this market. And most importantly, there are no hard caps typically as to how much would one be able to buy also, except in Singapore, who said that companies can only buy 5% or carbon credits corresponding to 5% of their total emissions. But now at COP29, the Article 6 that governs these international voluntary carbon markets was renegotiated, and there are some new rules concerning the international sales and purchases of this market. But my point really is the key mechanism for carbon reductions based on previous track record are the legally binding legally binding compliance markets on the left-hand side. Now, let's jump into the role of technologies and how they can help companies to not only just to comply with the ESG regulations, the numerous ones that we've gone through, but also actually improve your performance in reducing less, becoming more circular, and so on. Like I alluded already, I think the era of Excel sheets is gone. So alone for the assurance requirement, I think you really need to be looking at making your data auditable. And in the interest of best enterprise performance, another key topic is automating the data collection and management for this. And of course, we really cannot talk about data and enterprise technology applications without AI anymore. So broadening out the discussion into technology and sustainability, I really want to offer you 3 perspectives that you should be thinking about. First of all, data and insights. Secondly, how technology can help you establishing more sustainable operations, processes, and policies, as well as ultimately to create more sustainable products and services. You might also associate these 3 steps with creating baseline transparency, optimizing your company operations, as well as ultimately transforming how you run. Let's go through these one by one. So first of all, when it comes to your carbon data or other sustainability data, you really have to think about that in the context of your organizational structure, the master data in all your different operations, wherever in the world they are. And I think the key is really understanding where do certain emissions occur? Because the purpose is not just to report, but to take action and remedy things in the interest of best performance. Now, increasingly, you also have to not just report Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but also Scope 3. And as you know, Scope 3 emissions are occurring everywhere in the value chain. And for many companies, these are 70 to 80% of the total emissions. So I think where Scope 1 and 2 is quite easy to keep track of because it's mostly under your own operations, Scope 3 is the more difficult part. Here, different methods can be applied. At SAP, we support 3 methods for capturing Scope 3 data. So first of all, we support collection of actual emissions across the value chain based on standardized methods. If that is not an option for you, you can also use the master data, knowing how much did you spend on certain categories of products or services or materials, and we can apply certain keys based on that spend. The third option is to look up life cycle analysis databases, which are scientific databases for emission factors. We also support that. But of course, your company may be buying tens of thousands of SKUs and different products and so on. So the question becomes how to do that effectively. So we offer AI services to do that. to bring you that efficiency. And clients who are using this are reporting up to 80% efficiency savings in doing so. Of course, you also need to keep track of how you're progressing towards metrics and targets. So this again underlines the need to automate data, keep that data flowing so you have at any point in time access to the latest information, because reporting, it cannot, or sustainability management cannot be just a yearly exercise. At every quarterly board meeting, I think you should be able to expect to see the latest numbers if you have automated them, which is, I think, the standard moving forward. And one new thing is also to bring sustainability and carbon data in conjunction with your financial data. So what we're doing at SAP is that we're actually now bringing carbon data into financial accounting, so that next to any financial measure, you'll be able to see what's the carbon footprint of that profit, of that loss center, or any other enterprise activity. And this is a solution that is becoming available in December 16. We apply the same methods for carbon accounting as we apply for financial accounting. So double entry bookkeeping, balancing accounts. This is what guides our carbon accounting methods. Let's jump into sustainable operations and policies. So again, I want to underline the importance of digitalizing your processes, because if you don't know what's happening in your value chain as part of your operations, how can you then actually pinpoint where your emissions or effluents or other things are happening? So in my eyes, digital transformation and digitalization of processes is the key enabler of taking sustainability action where it matters. One of our clients, Waycool from India, that is an integrated, quite vertical agri-food company, has done exactly that. So they are managing both their supply as well as the distribution side very much digitally. And doing so, they've been able to reduce the food waste as part of their operations down to just 1%, compared to an average of 20 to 30% in the Indian industry. And I think this really illustrates that if you have a good handle on data, this helps you to manage the sustainability matters very well as well. And of course, reduced food waste equates to reduced carbon emissions as well. A couple of examples concerning sustainable policies in terms of some of our clients and our own operations. So Standard Chartered is also an SAP client who has implemented a so-called taxi tax. So Standard Chartered, especially here in Singapore and other locations, would really like to have their employees use public transportation. I mean, that really works here very well here in Singapore. So they have introduced this kind of carrot or stick approach, where they say, okay, if you're going to a customer meeting and say you're in Singapore, you could be actually taking underground, but if you're taking a taxi and claim that back, you will actually not get the full amount refunded. So a small amount of that taxi claim will actually be retained and used for a CSR project. And the point here is to, in a subtle and yet significant way, nudge employees towards more sustainable choices. At SAP, we have reworked our mobility benefits a lot. In some countries, we have traditionally had corporate cars as quite some popular perks. But of course, not everyone wants to have a car, and not everyone needs to have a car. So instead, we have worked out a mobility benefit that employees can use for pretty much any alternative methods to driving a car, which could be buying an e-bike, using trains, or even car sharing and things like that. So mobility today does not necessarily need to mean a fancy car. And this is especially appreciated by our younger colleagues. Finally, let us come to sustainability products and services. And I'd also like to share with you a couple of real-life examples. This is one client of ours again. Martur Fombak is an automotive supplier from Turkey that produces car seats among some other products. So they have fully embraced digital transformation and also AI, also as part of their customer experience. And by automating data collection and by automating carbon footprint calculations for their products, they've actually managed to reduce the carbon footprint per car seat by 34%, because basically their teams don't need to spend all that time in doing some Excel operations, calculations based on spreadsheets that anyway cannot be audited, but they can focus on the real impact work, and technology basically does the work in terms of data collection and those calculations. And another example, this time from the Asia region, this is another automotive supplier, Matsumoto Precision, that supplies the precision parts to Japanese tier 1 manufacturers. Now let's have a look at their approach. So as you could see on the video, Matsumoto uses a lot of, well, 100% renewable energy. And that's one of the ways how they can actually produce products with a lower carbon footprint. But as they produce a big portfolio of different kinds of products, they really face the need to communicate the product carbon footprint for each of those products. But without probably digitalizing their processes or the calculation of per product carbon footprints, they were not able to convincingly communicate this towards their clients. So that's why they made this investment into digital technologies to run their business in a fully transparent way, and hence also being able to calculate the product carbon footprint in a fully automated way. Now, we've covered quite a few perspectives on regulations and the role of technology in helping your company, not just to comply, but to improve sustainability performance. So let's come to my final recommendations. So what is the role of boards in sustainability, and how can you play a role in adopting more sustainability initiatives as well as enhancing oversight? Couple of key takeaways. What are the must-dos? So first of all, as a board member, as a board, you oversee the business strategy. And as I said, even if the national regulation does not necessarily yet require both the inside-out views as well as the outside-in views, i.e. double materiality, this affects your business and your relationship with your external stakeholders. So as a board member, I would want to see a clear strategy from the company actually for double materiality, including sustainability, climate, nature, as well as social matters. It's also your role to approve the metrics and targets and to ensure that you have a robust, rigid, science-based governance in place in terms of getting there. And of course, you will need to be continuously monitoring your progress. So if you can only monitor and get the data once a year, I think that doesn't really give a much time to, let's say, take corrective action if the progress is not on track. And here again, my advice is to demand hard data that can be audited, and you would probably want that to be automated to avoid any pitfalls. Of course, you're also responsible for compensation of the boards. And my recommendation would be to keep sustainability performance as part of that, with related consequence management if needed. Now, beyond that, a couple of practical considerations. As I mentioned, my recommendation is to start considering sustainability data as any enterprise data with the related quality requirements. And this won't also happen by itself. Likely, many companies haven't yet done it. And you probably need to be expecting some investment asks for that as well. Furthermore, I think sustainability cannot be really regarded as a standalone function. As I've shown, it relates to many enterprise functions, whether it's the IT, whether it's your procurement, whether it's your operations. And I would see that you as a board member need to help the company to bridge those silos and to develop sustainability as a comprehensive capability. It's more of a team sport, really. You also have to be expecting more and more sustainability regulations. These still continue to evolve, and more jurisdictions are rolling these out. Secondly, despite, let's say, world politics, many jurisdictions have also indicated that the cost of carbon will keep going up. Singapore is one of them. Finally, it's not just about cost or risks, even if sea levels keep rising. There are many opportunities to capitalize on unique sustainability products and services that actually can differentiate your company from the competition. So you have to have those on your radar, and you have to know how to help your company navigate these different opportunities that are arising. With that, why don't we open the forum for questions and answers, and we'll try to take as many as possible, and if we cannot take them all, we'll try to answer those as a follow-up via email. You may also wish to take note of my contacts or connect with me on LinkedIn if you like. But let's now move on to the questions.
Thanks a lot, Susanna. There are quite a few questions coming in. I will dive straight into them, mostly because most of them are what I was thinking anyway. But Sumitra has this question about what are the most critical metrics boards should use to track the ROI of sustainability initiatives. I have a question that's kind of tacked on to that based on what your last point, where you were saying that there should be sort of consequences for non-compliance. Do companies around the world already do this? I mean, of course, when board members or management does not reach KPI, there are always consequences, but I have yet to see people do it for sustainability yet. So let's take it one at a time. What are the most critical metrics to track ROI? Then we'll talk about the whole, what do you do with board members who do not meet the sustainability KPIs?
Right. Well, as I said, the path towards a more sustainable company in a more sustainable way is quite unique to every company. So depending on the sector, for some companies, it might be a question of completely transforming the way you produce goods and services. So for instance, if we talk about steel industry, the scientifically recommended method is to move to green steel using renewable energy and electric furnaces. So one criteria for that would be to say, okay, are you on the right track to adopt this new technology? And of course, then other metrics would be, okay, how much revenue are you creating with this? What's your cost position relating to this? Have you been able to reduce your tax liabilities, carbon tax liabilities, and other carbon costs? Like I mentioned in the case of Marto Fombach, so they actually have also an AI-assisted app through which they nudge their customers towards more sustainable material choices and hence buying lower carbon products. Because it's not enough just to produce these, customers also need to buy this. So I think I would keep a very close eye on how such new, more sustainable products develop in terms of revenue and also in terms of profitability. So again, there is no one answer. It really depends on how are you transforming your company, what are the key activities, and how are you tracking, I think, against your competitors as well. And a number of these frameworks also require you to disclose your performance against industry benchmarks.
Okay, so that's one method of putting it. What about that whole, not compensating, but having appropriate measures if management or the board do not comply with the sustainability? Have companies already been doing that worldwide? Because at
No,
the
I think it's frankly there's still been a bit of a soft approach. But of course, if you broaden the context to reputation management, engaging with the civil society around you. For instance, the number of climate litigations is increasing heavily. And this obviously goes back to the company's activities, the disclosures they are doing. Are they greenwashing and stuff like that?
Yes.
So if company is not working, let's say, towards scientific goals or is exaggerating their positive impact, there are organizations out there that are out there to get you, so to say, because I think there is very little tolerance for greenwashing anymore. So you have to think about the potential consequences. And yes, there can be criminal proceedings as well. We've seen in many European courts actually this taking place.
Okay. I mean, I know there's the law, greenwashing law as well, and I have a feeling that will be increasingly sort of enforced as we go forward. I mean, just one thing to all our participants, if there's a question you particularly like, please upvote it and we will get to that one as soon as we can. Azmi Wan Hamza, I know where the question's going, but I am actually going to sort of paraphrase it a little bit. So basically, they're saying that what about global trends in terms of sustainability? The fact is, some economies, we were talking about the politics of it and how it'll probably shape the policies going forward. What happens when their politics and their policies that go in the opposite direction? You have those who maybe want to go back to slightly the old way days and everything like that. So does that mean that your region and your efforts are maybe sometimes a bit banging your head against a brick wall, if you get what I mean? Because certain economies are not adhering to those standards. Will that derail the entire, what do you call it, the entire progress to sustainability going forward?
Well, this is a big question.
It
I
is a
kind of
very
think
big
what you're
question.
alluding
It's a
to,
geopolitical question.
but
So I'm
let me offer a perspective on this from climate perspective in particular. I think for many years, globally speaking, we've been stuck in the narrative, kind of a little bit old world versus new world, like Western societies, Asian societies. And a lot of people have said, oh, if China is not doing this, if India is not doing it, it doesn't really matter what the rest of the world does.
yes.
Well, I think that dynamic has changed a lot. I mean, look at China. They are the worldwide leading country in terms of decarbonization, and also providing many of the critical technologies and products to the rest of the world. Let's think about solar panels and EVs, for instance. So China is installing more solar power capacity than rest of the world together. So I say China is decarbonizing faster than anyone, and they're actually going to reach their nationally determined contributions as part of the IPCC many years in advance, whereas other countries are typically lagging behind. Now let's look at India. India is also installing huge amounts of hundreds of gigawatts of solar energy. They're really ramping up. So my view is that these big countries that are very relevant in global economy, India also expected to become number 4 in terms of global economies by 2050, China number 1, right? They are doing it. Yeah. So let's not be stuck in the old kind of East-West narrative. This is a very dynamic field, and there are market forces behind this. Many sustainable solutions, including renewable energy, is getting cheaper and cheaper. And I think ultimately that's kind of the opportunity. It's cheaper to produce and store renewable energy compared to fossil fuels in many cases. So that probably will ultimately be one of the game changers. Yeah, and China
Yeah.
and India are doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually very glad to hear that particular perspective, given how things are going. Humayun Habib has, thanks you for the CPF Thailand example. I found it very interesting as well. They're asking for an example of an organization, Malaysia, that is also leading in sustainability initiatives and policy framework. I would actually like to know that. Like, so where does Malaysia measure up in the standard?
Well, I think the standard is still fairly new, and you have a number of companies who have been doing disclosures already because of investor, stakeholder, and extraterritorial regulatory expectations. So I'm not really sure if I could go into details here, but I think you can look at some of the biggest companies in Malaysia doing quite a good job in sustainability disclosures already, because they've been doing it for a long time, and also for a bigger scope than the NSRF requires.
Okay, so Malaysia isn't far behind, you think, or good start?
Well, I would say where do we set the standard?
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah,
But
so I think many companies still have a lot of work to do to catch up the expectations for the latest standards, but some companies have been doing it for a while, have significant teams and knowledge. So something you can learn from, probably.
yeah, we will address actually another part of that question later, but Sumitra has a question again where how do organizations or nations address double counting of total GHG emissions? So if one organization scope 2 emissions is another organization scope 3 emissions. I know this question's come up quite a lot actually every time I've attended one of these conferences. So how do you address that?
Well, I would approach this a little bit differently. So if we stay on high level, scope 1 and 2 emissions are kind of your own. Of course, you've used a lot of electricity, then that's also kind of the electricity producers or energy providers emissions as well. But I think the whole point here really is not necessary to completely get rid of double counting, because I mean, scope 3 in particular is someone else's primary emissions, right? But the point here is to be transparent, yeah? And to be fully transparent means that you have a good grip of not just your scope 1 and 2 emissions, but scope 3. And I think the spirit has to be that of collaboration, that every company needs to engage both with their upstream suppliers as well as downstream suppliers to jointly take whatever action is needed to bring those emissions in total down. Yeah.
I see.
I'm actually not too worried about that double counting. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. That's
Transparency is the key imperative
so
here,
as long
in
as
my
you
view.
are aware that basically that it is transparent across the board in general, then the double counting, not that it doesn't become an issue, but it becomes more apparent where the overlap is, I think. Is that fair?
So again, the whole context here is not just reporting, is to take action where it matters most. And you need the transparency for that. And then you need the collaborations. Then you need the new materials and technologies and ways of collaborating to take action where it matters most.
All right. There's two questions that I want to combine for the next one. HPC asks about the major challenge for many companies in Asia, especially SMEs, is digitalization. It's an important, of course, you mentioned, right? It's an area important for reporting strategy, not just sustainability, no more paper Excel sheets and all of that. Cost, resources, effort, frequently those stand in the way. How do you see boards addressing this more effectively, apart from just, oh, it kind of needs to be done? And actually somebody was asking as well, and that's the second part to this question, about how do you educate staff about sustainability, since sustainability, as they always say, involves all, you know, from absolute top to bottom. So the first part, how can boards address this challenge of digitalization more effectively instead of just, oh, we just need to do it?
Well, digitalization is actually, I understand, can be quite a big step for many companies, but I think it's also, a big opportunity to actually have a closer look of how do you really operate, and how can you create more efficiencies, more transparency by doing that in a digitally assisted way. So I think this really requires a bit of introspection, saying, okay, probably we have certain areas that are not performing so well anyway. So what are the biggest challenges we're facing? Is this, I don't know, time to delivery or quality or supply chain issues, and looking at the real problem statements they are, and seeing, okay, now how could digital technologies actually help with that? And in most cases, when one does such a discovery, I think one can learn many new opportunities to rethink business, rethink processes, and then to, ultimately make the business case that would justify the investment as well. So many consultants help with this kind of processes. Often it's triggered by non-performance related to industry benchmarks. But like I said, every company has unique opportunities and challenges. So you might want to get some consultancy support for this to identify the real pain points where your company's performance lags behind. But here, really, my advice is also that moving forward, any such considerations must include sustainability, because sustainability is baked into how your company operates. The business as usual scenario may not yet consider it, but moving forward, I think it's imperative that climate, circularity, social dimensions are considered as part of the digital transformation. Because how else are you going to address it? Where are you going to get the data? You're just stuck in the old world and business as usual, if not.
Yeah. You cannot do that. I don't think anymore. But the other part of the question is that then how do you communicate that to staff, since sustainability, like we say, involve all? Because based on the best examples that you've seen, what are the most effective methods of communicating it to staff, you think? The success stories.
Well, look, I think sometimes there is also kind of a little bit the notion that this had to be a top-down initiative that people wouldn't know. But actually, a common method in sustainability is to do stakeholder consultations. Yeah. If we look at the world, and United Nations and similar organizations have run big global surveys, which show from memory that actually 60 to 70 people, 70% people, even more, support climate action. Yeah. But somehow there is this disconnect between what do I think and feel and experience in the personal life and kind of what happens at work. But I think in the Japanese methodology for various approaches, whether it's Kaizen or others, I think there's always been this approach to actually talking to people, listening to them, hearing their thoughts. And I would think that if it's done properly, staff will able to also pinpoint many issues that are happening, or kind of make that connection between what they're experiencing in their private lives, whether it's like floods or hot days, working outdoors, and kind of relate that back to the work experience and make some suggestions. But in general, this is still a fairly new topic for many. So we see many clients also hiring consultants that have experience with this to get it kick-started.
Actually, that's an interesting point that you point out, that there is that disconnect for a lot of us between maybe the adverse weather effects that we are experiencing these days and actually, the cause of it, right? And work and everything like that. I think that is something that maybe all of us need to maybe sort of rewire in our heads as well, because some people will see yearly floods as just yearly floods and not link it to the fact that, oh, because we are doing this is why the yearly floods get worse, right? And that is the disconnect, like you say, between what we do at work and sort of what happens in our lives day to day.
Yeah, sometimes we just need to facilitate that kind of click.
That click, right? That click. Actually, it's also related to this question. We will take a few more questions because there's so many of them. Molly Fong actually has this question about concrete examples where companies have actually experienced positive returns from their sustainability efforts? Or is it still largely a situation where the costs outweigh the perceived value other than just compliance? And that value, how is that value measured? I'd love to hear this answer from you, because for me, I think the companies that have gone into sustainability, I do see some positive effects, at least in how they're perceived in the public view and some for their businesses.
Yeah, so I think although we talked about creating more sustainable products and services and keeping track of, let's say, the financial returns on this, I think we need to take a fairly broad view when it comes to sustainability and a long-term view. To me, sustainability is really a question of sustaining a company for the long term. Yeah, which means that, first of all, you need to have the social license to operate. What you do needs to be accepted by the society, by the governments, customers, business ecosystems. You also need to have access to markets where certain rules apply, not same as in Malaysia necessarily. You need to maintain supply of critical materials and operating conditions. As we saw earlier, 52% of global GDP depends on nature. So if nature runs havoc, that has a big impact on how you operate, on availability of materials, and so on. So to me, sustainability and taking action there creates these conditions for operating long term. And we also need to see this not in the context of individual companies, but industries raising their standards, because many companies in the same industries face the same challenges. So this is what I also see as a positive development. If you have one industry where somebody goes into a lead position with regards to certain sustainability activities, they then usually draw the others to follow them, because they will be left behind in competition if they don't. But also then these kind of certain expectations are pushed down to the supplier. So this can lift entire industries. So we see this happening in many industries globally, not yet in all, but let's take consumer electronics, like Apple leading the way in many aspects, and competition needs to follow. We see this very clearly.
Okay. There was something in your slides that you mentioned, specifically the term that we've heard a lot of recently, which is the alphabet soup in terms of standards, right? Somebody is asking, what standards should people be focused on, since there's so many standards to apply? Is that how would you answer a question like that? Because for me, when I look at it, I always feel it depends on the market you're serving or the people you're serving. But please, well, what's your view?
Yeah. If I go kind of from the core and then expand, what most standards agree are the climate disclosures, scope 1, 2, and 3, where they then vary a little bit also depending on the national jurisdiction, is the timelines and I would say the rigor of assurance and so on. But at the core, they are very much agreed across all these standards. So that's a kind of given. You do that using, let's say, IFRS S1, S2, so the national framework in Malaysia. And that's a good start. In certain jurisdictions, you may need to be, like, let's say, intensify the efforts to do certain things a little bit more and more extensively or earlier, but that's a good standard. Then, if your company is doing business in Europe, you have to have a close look at the EU CSRD, because that may be required of you.
Of course.
But that really is a very broad standard. So if you do the Malaysian one, you get ready towards doing the European one, then you actually cover most of the requirements. Yeah. But then, of course, depending what business you are in, what materials you're dealing with, you need to comply with that kind of specific regulations. And the one big one coming up is for plastics. So pay attention to the United Plastics Treaty. That's, I think, the final conclusion is coming out any time now, which means you need to disclose usage of plastics in products, and especially packaging. There should be phase-out regulations coming for certain materials, extending producer responsibility schemes, where the producer probably will need to pay at the end of the day. So that's a new upcoming topic that hasn't really been so widely adopted yet, but I expect in the next years a lot more focus and attention on the plastics topic.
I know they've been trying to sort of limit the use of single-use plastics for a very long time, but then COVID came along and kind of derailed that agenda. So are we getting back to that? No more single-use plastics again, do you think?
Well, the spirit of the UN treaty, I mean, yet to come out,
Yes, come out, yes.
is to certainly move away from single use as much as possible. It very much embodies the thinking of circularity. I mean, plastics is a very durable material, right? But not all plastics are the same. Certain plastics we can recycle over and over, yeah? But that means those materials also need to be collected and processed, which costs money. So there's kind of new economic thinking that needs to go behind this, and yeah, producers will be asked to pay.
We'll finish up because we're sadly running out of time, but there's like so much to cover. But Darren Kong has this question about what are the essential infrastructure required for digitalizing sustainability practice in an organization? I mean, like what, I suppose they're asking what the bare bone racks are for to sort of build this process.
Again, this depends on what your company does. So effectively the materiality assessment, definitely from financial perspective, but ultimately from the double materiality perspective as well. I think climate is non-negotiable. That really applies for everyone. But if I look at this from an enterprise IT or technology perspective, from SAP perspective, the backbone of all this is the ERP system. Which holds a lot of relevant information.
Yes, yes.
So one is the structure of your company, like what entities do you have, how are they structured, where are they, what do they do? And you need to relate your sustainability data to those organizational entities because you want to give them metrics and targets and keep track of their progress. Second point is that ERP systems hold material data, data about the purchased goods and services. So again, how we handle materials is a key emission driver, is a key circularity factor. So you have that baseline of the company material data already and in an ERP system. And the third area is about processes. You run your processes using certain technology. But if we want to reach better sustainability outcomes, first of all, we need to have transparency of the sustainability performance in processes. But secondly, we probably need to modify those processes a bit to deliver not just goods and services at certain costs, but improved sustainability outcomes. And the fourth area I would say is the reporting. So you need robust, auditable data, and ideally, you'll be able to do your sustainability or at least climate reporting next to your finances as well. Because when we talk about climate opportunities and risks, these are financial matters as well. So you would want to have that transparency of what's your carbon footprint in a certain context, but like how is this affecting your profit and loss? You think about the new products and services that you probably invested into delivering in lower carbon ways. So how does this all play in? Because I think boards and executives need to have that kind of transparency for these different dimensions. So both financial as well as the sustainability performance. And ideally that is one next to each other.
All right, I think that's a great note to kind of finish on. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all your questions, but I think the ICDM team hopefully will follow up on some of them afterwards. But all in all, thank you so much, Susanna, for spending your morning and giving us this wonderful insight into how sort of companies can lay the bare bone networks for this going forward. Anyways, thanks everybody for attending us this morning. We would love to hear your feedback on the session. As you can see, there's a QR code, so please drop us any feedback and questions. Just a couple of notes to remember, there is a PowerTalk coming up, Boardroom Insights 2025, Navigating Governance, Risk and Strategic Foresight. That's coming up on December 17th. And that will have Saket Bhartia, Richard Ong, Kristen Fu, and Lillian Wong. And that will be the program on sort of like what to look out for in the coming year as we wrap up. And of course, you can go over to ICDM's website for info on many other programs, public programs, accreditation programs as well. And with that, we've come to the end of the webinar for today. Thank you so much for all your participation and your questions. Please have a good week ahead.
Thank you very much all.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you again.